Right now, for the first time in human history, we are listening to another planet. There is a microphone on the surface of Mars. It rode there on the Perseverance rover, and in 2021, it did something no instrument had ever done before. It recorded the actual sound of another world. The thin, Martian wind, the whir of the machine, the crunch of wheels on alien ground. For the whole of human history, Mars was a silent point of red light. Now we can hear it, and what the microphone revealed was itself a small revelation. Sound behaves differently there. The Martian air is so thin and so cold that sound travels slower than on Earth, and the high tones fade out fast, so the planet is not only quiet, it is muffled, a world where a voice would carry wrong, and the high notes would simply die in the air. We did not just hear Mars. We learned that Mars sounds like nowhere else, a low, deadened hush, very nearly the sound you would imagine for a world the ancients called the planet of the grave. And a second machine, the InSight lander, did something stranger still. It put a seismometer on the surface and listened downward into the body of the planet. And it heard Mars move. Hundreds of times, tremors rising from deep inside, from somewhere below the surface. We have been recording for several years now, signals coming from inside Mars. That second machine deserves a moment, because of what it heard. The InSight lander carried a seismometer so sensitive it could register the ground shifting by less than the width of an atom, and over its mission it detected more than 1,300 marsquakes, tremors rolling up from deep inside the planet. The largest of them shook the ground for hours. By reading how those waves traveled, scientists mapped the interior of Mars for the first time. The thickness of its crust, the size of its molten core. The point is simple and strange. Mars is not an inert rock. It is a body that moves, that rings, that sends energy up through itself from somewhere far below. And we have spent the last few years with an ear pressed to its surface, writing down every pulse that comes up from inside. The official story is geology, that Mars, like Earth, has a settling crust and a warm interior, and that the tremors are natural. And that story is, most likely, true. But there is a clay tablet from the oldest layer of the Sumerian world that does not call Mars the red planet. It calls it something closer to the way station, a waypoint, a marker on a road through the sky, and it says that beneath its surface a thing was set down and sealed. An outpost, and that this outpost would go on sending its signal long after the ones who built it had gone. A beacon counting down in the dark, beneath the rust, waiting to be heard again by whoever finally came close enough to listen. We have just now come close enough to listen. Today, 3 things. First, what is actually, physically true about Mars, that we are recording its sound and its tremors right now. That it was once a living, watered world, and that pieces of it have fallen to Earth. Second, what the Sumerians said about the wanderer they tracked in the sky and the famous formation on the Martian surface that has never stopped causing arguments. And third, the tablet itself, the way station, the buried outpost, the signal, and the count it keeps. Let's go up to the red world, start with what Mars actually is, because the first thing to clear away is a myth, and not an ancient one, a modern one. People speak of the dark side of Mars, as if, like the moon, it keeps one face permanently turned away. It does not. Mars is not locked to anything. It spins on its axis once every 24.5 hours, a day, almost exactly the length of ours, so every part of its surface turns through light and dark, just like Earth. There is no permanent dark side of Mars. What there is a buried side, a Mars beneath the Mars we see. And that hidden world, under the rust-red dust, is far stranger than any dark hemisphere, because Mars was not always a dead red desert. This is the part that has been confirmed, mission after mission, beyond any serious doubt. Mars once had water, vast amounts of it. It had rivers. We have photographed their dried channels, their deltas, the smooth, rounded pebbles that only running water makes. It had lakes. Many scientists believe it had an ocean covering much of its northern hemisphere. It had a thicker atmosphere, a warmer climate, and the conditions for a long stretch of its early history that we associate with the possibility of life. Mars, in its deep past, was a blue and living-looking world. And then something happened to it. It lost its atmosphere, lost its magnetic field, lost its water to space and to the ground, and the blue world rusted into the red one we see, a planet that looks more than anything like the corpse of an Earth. What actually killed it is itself unsettling, because it is the one thing standing between Earth and the same fate. Early Mars had a magnetic field generated by its churning molten core, and that field wrapped the planet in an invisible shield that held its atmosphere in place. Then the core cooled, the dynamo faltered, and the shield switched off, and with nothing left to protect it, the solar wind stripped Mars of its air and its water, molecule by molecule, across hundreds of millions of years, until the blue world suffocated and dried. Earth still has its field, Mars lost its. The difference between a living planet and a rusted tomb turned out to be a magnetic field generated deep underground, which is to say, the survival of an entire world depended on what was happening far beneath its surface. And Mars keeps one more small puzzle overhead. It has two tiny moons, Phobos and Deimos, lumpy little objects, nothing like the round moons of the outer planets. Phobos, the inner one, is strange enough that a respected scientist once half-seriously suggested it might be hollow, because it seemed too light and orbited too oddly for a solid rock. Later probes found it is not hollow but porous, full of voids, a loosely packed rubble pile, slowly spiraling inward toward its own destruction. No one is claiming it was built. But it is one more thing about the red world that, on first careful inspection, looked wrong enough to make serious people ask serious questions, a pattern that seems to follow Mars everywhere we point an instrument. A world that was alive and is now sealed under rust. Hold that, because the tablet describes exactly that, and says the sealing was deliberate. The evidence of that lost water has only hardened with each mission. The Curiosity rover, climbing through the layers of Gale Crater, found the unmistakable signature of a lake that lasted for millions of years. Fine, muddy sediment, the chemistry of standing fresh water, the kind of place that on Earth would be teeming with life. The Perseverance rover was sent to Jezero Crater precisely because from orbit it showed the fan-shaped delta of an ancient river mouth, frozen in stone. A river that once flowed into a lake, building the very same deltas rivers build on Earth, and cutting across the planet's face runs Valles Marineris, a canyon system long enough to stretch across the whole United States, and 10 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. Mars is not a small dead world. It is a full planet with a violent and watered history written all over its surface that died sometime after that history was complete. And there is, in fact, a hidden Mars beneath the visible one. Orbiters have photographed deep pits opening into the ground, the collapsed skylights of vast lava tubes, natural tunnels, some large enough to swallow a city, running below the surface where they are shielded from the radiation and the cold that make the open ground so hostile. Scientists studying where future explorers might actually shelter keep coming back to them, because the safest place to survive on Mars is not the rusted surface at all. It is underground, the one place a human being could live on Mars, and the one place the tablet says something was sealed. Turn out to be the same place, beneath. And Mars is not as far from us, physically, as it feels. We have pieces of it. Among the meteorites recovered on Earth, a small number have been identified by the gases trapped inside them, which match the Martian atmosphere precisely, as rocks blasted off the surface of Mars by ancient impacts that crossed space and fell here. One of them, a meteorite catalogued as ALH8 4001, became world news in 1996 when a NASA team announced it contained structures that might be the fossil traces of microscopic Martian life. The claim was fought over for years and never fully proven and never fully killed. but set the verdict aside and hold the bare fact. We have rocks from Mars in our laboratories that we have seriously examined for the remains of life. The question of whether Mars carried life is not fringe. It is an open scientific file. It is worth understanding how we even know these rocks are Martian. When a large asteroid slams into Mars, it can blast surface rock off the planet hard enough to escape its gravity entirely. That debris drifts through space, sometimes for millions of years, until a fraction of it crosses Earth's path and falls. We identify them by the tiny bubbles of gas sealed inside the stone. Gas whose exact chemical fingerprint matches the Martian atmosphere our landers measured, and matches nothing else. So we hold, in our laboratories, certified pieces of another planet, delivered free across the void. We have put Mars under a microscope without ever leaving home, and one of those pieces was examined, in earnest, for the fossils of life. And we are no longer only looking. Right now, there are more spacecraft operating at Mars than at any time in history, sent by several different nations. Perseverance is drilling and sealing tubes of Martian rock and soil and laying them on the surface, the first stage of an audacious plan to carry pieces of Mars home. Space agencies and private companies are openly planning to send human beings, to put people on that surface within the lifetimes of most people watching this. After half a century of leaving Mars to robots, the whole species is, all at once, turning back toward it and preparing to go. We are, by any measure, an age returning to the road. That part is not mythology. The rovers, the recordings, the marsquakes, the dried rivers, the meteorites, all of it is in the data. Now let us go to what the ancients said about the Red Wanderer. The Sumerians and the Babylonians were the first careful astronomers, and they tracked the planets with a precision that still astonishes scholars. They knew Mars. They watched it move against the fixed stars, slow and red, and they gave it a character, and the character they gave it was dread. To the Babylonians, the red planet was associated with Nergal, a god of war, of plague, of the scorched land, and of the underworld, a deity of burning and of the dead. Of all the wanderers in their sky, the red one was the ominous one, the planet of the grave. They did not look at Mars and see a neighbor. They looked at it and saw a dead, burning world ruled by a lord of the underworld, which is, allowing for the language of myth, a fairly accurate description of a planet that had died and rusted. And their tracking of it was not crude. The Babylonian astronomers followed Mars through the strangest thing it does in the sky, its retrograde motion, the way it appears to slow, stop, reverse, and loop backward against the stars before moving forward again. They recorded those loops across centuries, kept tables accurate enough that modern astronomers can still use the data and read them as omens. And the omens tied to the red planet were almost always omens of death, the fall of a king, the coming of plague, the ruin of a city. From Babylon onward, across the whole ancient Near East, the Red Wanderer was the planet you did not want to see brighten. They had no telescopes. They had only their eyes and their records. And what those records show is a civilization watching Mars with the wary, unblinking attention you give to something dangerous. And then, there is the part of the Mars story the modern world cannot let go of. Cydonia, in 1976, a NASA Viking orbiter, mapping the Martian surface in search of landing sites, photographed a formation in a region called Cydonia that looked, in that image, unmistakably like a human face staring up from the surface, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, framed in shadow. It became one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century. For decades, some argued it was an artificial monument. The official position was that it was a trick of light and shadow on a natural hill. And when the higher resolution cameras of later missions returned, that is largely what they showed: a natural mesa, an eroded landform, the face dissolving into ordinary rock under better light. I am not going to tell you the face is artificial. The careful answer is that it is most likely a natural formation, seen in suggestive lighting, But the Cydonia image is real. It is in the NASA archive, and it did something important. It put the question on the table, in the open, with a photograph. Is there anything on Mars that was made? It is worth being precise about Cydonia, because it grew into an industry. Around the famous face, some researchers identified what they called a complex. Clusters of mounds they named the city. A five-sided hill they called the D&M pyramid. Alignments they argued were too regular to be chance. A former NASA consultant, Richard Hoagland, built an entire theory on it. And when Mars Global Surveyor and the later European cameras returned in far higher resolution, the case largely dissolved. The face flattened into an eroded mesa, the pyramids into ordinary hills, the alignments into wishful pattern finding on a cratered plain. I want to be straight that this is where the evidence points. Cydonia is most likely entirely natural. But the episode matters for one reason. It was the first time our species looked at the surface of another planet and seriously, publicly asked whether something there had been built. The face was probably a rock. The question it forced open was not a dead red world the ancients tied to the underworld, a formation that, for a moment, looked built. Hold both, because the tablet brings them together. The tablet sits, like the others in this series, under the designation the curators reserve for texts that have been read but do not fit, not a hymn, not a king's account, not an ordinary list. Its vocabulary is the same second-order kind, the words that belong at once to measurement and to the gods. And its structure is a record kept over time, a column of values, each paired with a phrase. It speaks of a red wanderer, and it does not describe it as a god, to be feared in the abstract. It describes it as a place, a station on a road. The tablet uses for this red point of light a word the translators render as something between a waypoint and a storehouse, a place you stop on a long journey where supplies are kept. And it says that on this red station, before the kingship of earth, those who traveled the sky set down a thing and sealed it beneath the surface, under the rust, and set it to call, to send, on a long interval, a signal, so that the station could be found again, when the road was traveled once more. A sealed outpost beneath the surface of Mars, set to send a signal. Written 4,000 years before we put a seismometer on that surface, and started hearing signals come up from below. And notice the specific claim the tablet is making, because it is more precise than a vague legend. It does not say Mars is a god or a star or merely an omen. It says Mars is infrastructure, a built point on a route, a place stocked and maintained for travelers, with a transmitter set beneath its surface. That is a strikingly mechanical idea to find in a 4,000-year-old text. Not worship, but logistics. A waypoint, a cache, a beacon. The Sumerians, who described the moon as a sealed vessel, the rivers as a covering, and the ice as a lid, here describe the red planet as a station on a road, and they treat the signal coming up from under its surface not as a wonder, but as a scheduled, expected, ongoing fact. And then, as always, it begins to count. This count, like the others, is written in the great units of the SAR, 3,600. But it does not count a covering of water or ice. It counts the signal. Each entry in the column marks an interval, and beside each one is a phrase that translates, roughly, as the station still calls. The station still calls. Entry after entry, across an immense span of time, each one a record that the thing beneath the red surface was still sending, still counting down, still waiting on its long schedule for an answer that had not yet come. It is, in plain terms, the log of a beacon, a record of a signal confirmed, over and over across thousands of years, by someone who expected that one day the call would finally be heard by the ones it was meant for. There is a detail in the spacing of those entries worth naming. The intervals are not even, they lengthen, each confirmation set further from the last than the one before, as if whoever kept the log understood the weight would be enormous, and was pacing the count to survive it. Send, wait, send again across a silence measured not in years, but in SARS, the great count of 3,600. It is the signature of a beacon built to outlast its makers by a span the mind can barely hold. The patience of something that did not expect a quick answer and was prepared to keep calling into the dark for as long as it took. I want to be careful here, because this is the point where a story like this runs hardest past what the evidence can carry. And on Mars, more than anywhere, I have to draw that line in heavy ink. What is documented is this: we are recording sound and seismic signals from Mars right now. The InSight lander detected hundreds of marsquakes, real tremors from inside the planet. Mars was once a watered, potentially habitable world that lost its atmosphere and rusted. We possess meteorites from Mars and have seriously examined one for traces of life. The Babylonians associated the red planet with a god of death and the underworld. And the Cydonia face is a real, world-famous photograph from a 1976 NASA mission, most likely showing a natural formation. What is interpretation, and I want to be blunt that it is interpretation, not fact, is the rest. That Mars was a way station, that anything was built or buried there, that the marsquakes are a signal rather than ordinary geology, that the tablet's red wanderer is a literal outpost. The idea that the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru and used Mars as a waypoint is the reading of one modern author, Zecharia Sitchin, and it is not accepted by mainstream scholars of Sumerian. I am not presenting it as established. I am telling you what this tablet says and letting you set it beside what the instruments are now, in fact, recording, and what the tablet says is that the signal does not stop. The final entries in the count do not end with the fall of the cities, or with the last scribe who could read them. The phrase "the station still calls" runs past all of it, projected forward by whoever kept the log into an age they could only mark as far ahead. An age, the tablet says, when the people of Earth would at last build the means to cross the dark and draw near enough to the red station to hear it. The final line, in the most defensible translation offered, does not say the signal fails. It says the station still calls. It is heard in the age that returns to the road, and the age that returns to the road. An age that finally goes back out into the sky, reaches the red world, and, for the first time, puts an ear to its surface. So what is the outpost? What was sealed beneath the rust, set to call across the eons? Here the tablet becomes deliberately restrained, and that restraint is the loudest thing in it. It does not describe a weapon or an army. What it says was set down on the red station is, in its own words, that which was placed on the road before the kingship, sealed so that it would keep until the travelers returned. And the verb it uses is, again, the one for storing seed against a famine, for keeping something safe until it can be used on the far side of a long emptiness. Not a threat, a cache. Something left at a waypoint by travelers who intended, one day, to come back along the same road, and a beacon set to guide them in. The tablet does not say exactly what was cached, or who left it. It says only what it is for, and that the ones who left it said they would know the time had come, time to return to the road, when the people of the surface world had finally crossed the dark and come close enough to hear the station call. We are right now the first generation to come close enough to listen. Let me bring this back to the ground you can stand on. We are recording real sound and real seismic signals from inside Mars at this moment. Mars was once a living-looking watered world that died and rusted. We hold pieces of it and have examined them for life. The ancients saw in the red planet the world of death and the underworld, and a real NASA photograph once showed a face on its surface that put the question of Martian artifacts into the open. That part is not mythology. That part is in the archive and the mission data. The tablet from the first city simply claims to be older than all of it. To have known the Red Wanderer, not as a light, but as a station on a road, with something sealed beneath its rust and a signal set to call until the travelers came back. And it claims they would come back precisely in the age when the people of Earth, having returned to the sky, finally put an instrument on that red surface and began, for the first time, to hear what was coming up from below. Maybe it is a coincidence of translation, and a natural hill, and the wishful reading of a single modern author. Or maybe the first people who learned to write left us a note saying that the red world is not silent, that it has been calling the whole time, and that we would start to hear it exactly when we are starting to hear it now. The microphone is on the surface, the seismometer is in the ground, and the signals, by every measurement we have, are still coming up from inside the red world. If you want to follow where the cuneiform record actually leads, not the speculation but the texts themselves, line by line, subscribe. We go one tablet deeper every time. The red world is still calling, and we have only just begun to listen.